Ind AS 24, related party disclosures. It is quite probable that related party relationship may have an effect on the profit or loss and financial position of an entity. The effect gets displayed through transactions that are entered between related parties that may not be entered with unrelated parties. Example, an entity may sell goods to its parent at cost. It may not sell goods at cost to an unrelated party. Next, transactions with unrelated party gets influenced because of related party relationships. Example, S Limited, a subsidiary of H Limited in steel manufacturing, use it to purchase billets from ER Limited, UR Limited. H Limited acquires 100% stake in FS Limited, who also manufactures billets. FS Limited is now a fellow subsidiary of S Limited. H Limited instructs S Limited not to purchase billets from UR Limited, but from FS Limited. That means it instructed to purchase it from FS Limited instead of UR Limited. These are the transactions with unrelated parties getting influenced because of related party relationships. Next, objective and the scope of Ind AS 24. The objective of the standard is to ensure that financial statements of an entity contains necessary disclosures with respect to related parties so that users' attention could be drawn to the possibility that financial statements may be affected by such related party relationships. Scope is as follows. Scope of Ind AS 24 is as follows. Identifying related party relationships, identifying related party transactions, identifying outstanding balances with related parties, identifying commitments with related parties, identifying the circumstances in which disclosures of above items is to be made, determining the disclosures to be made about the above items. Next, the disclosures are to be made in individual financial statements of the entity, consolidated and separate financial statements of a parent. The disclosures are not required when either such disclosures are in conflict with entity's duties of confidentiality or entity is prohibited by the statute. Example, banks are obliged by law to maintain confidentiality in respect of their customers' transactions, and the standard would not override the obligation to preserve the confidentiality of customers' dealings. What are the types of related party relationships? Types of related party relationships. Relationship between reporting entity and a person or persons. Relationship between reporting entity and another entity or entities. First one, understanding relationship between reporting entity and a person or persons. A person or a close member of that person's family is related to a reporting entity if that person has control or joint control over the reporting entity, has significant influence over the reporting entity, or is a key member of a key managerial person of the reporting entity or a parent of the reporting entity. KMPs, key managerial personnel, are those persons having authority and responsibility for planning, directing, and controlling the activities of the entity directly or indirectly, including a director, whether executive or otherwise, of that entity. Close members of the family of a person are the ones who may be expected to influence or be influenced by that person in their dealings with the entity. It includes that person's children, spouse, or domestic partner, brother, sister, father, mother, children of that person's spouse or domestic partner, and dependents of that person or that person's spouse or domestic partner. Example, Mr. A holds 51% in equity share capital of A Limited. A Limited has no other form of share capital. Here, Mr. A controls A Limited. He is a related party. Mrs. A is the wife of Mr. A. Mr. A holds 51% of the equity shares of A Limited. A Limited has no other form of share capital. Mr. A controls A Limited. Since Mr. A is a related party, Mrs. A is also a related party of A Limited. Next, Mr. D is the director of A Limited. Being a member of key management personnel of A Limited, he is related to A Limited. Mr. D is the director of H Limited. S Limited is the subsidiary of H Limited. Mr. D is related to S Limited. Next, understanding relationship between reporting entity and another entity. The entity and the reporting entity are members of the same group, which means that each parent, subsidiary, and the fellow member is related to others. Example, SA Limited and SB Limited are subsidiaries of H Limited. SA Limited, SB Limited, and H Limited are related to each other. Next, one entity is an associate or joint venture of the other entity, or an associate or joint venture of a member of a group of which the other entity is a member. Example, AS Limited is an associate of S Limited. S Limited is the subsidiary of H Limited. SH Limited is another subsidiary of H Limited. Here, AS Limited and SH Limited are related parties. Next, both entities are joint ventures of the same third party. Example, H Limited has entered into two joint ventures. JHA Limited joint venture with A Limited, JHB Limited joint venture with B Limited. Here, JHA Limited and JHB Limited are related parties. Next, one entity is a joint venture of third entity and the third entity is an associate of the third entity. Example, JH Limited is a joint venture of H Limited. AH Limited is an associate of H Limited. Here, JH Limited and AH Limited are related parties. Next one, the entity is an post-employment benefit plan for the benefit of employees of either the reporting entity or an entity related to the reporting entity. Next, the entity is controlled or jointly controlled by a person identified above. For example, Mr. A controls A Limited, the reporting entity. He also controls B Limited. Here, A Limited and B Limited are related to each other. A person identified above has significant influence over the entity or is a member of the key managerial person of the entity or of a parent of the entity. For example, Mr. A controls A Limited, the reporting entity. He is a non-executive director in B Limited. Here, A Limited and B Limited are related parties. Next, the entity or any member of a group of which it is a part provides KMP services to the reporting entity or to the parent of the reporting entity. Example, A Limited is a parent company with three subsidiaries, B Limited, C Limited, D Limited. It also has an associate company, E Limited. Subsidiary of F Limited. Subsidiary of E Limited is F Limited. F Limited provides key management personal services to A Limited. Here, F Limited is in related party relationship with A Limited, B Limited, C Limited, D Limited, and E Limited. The standard further states that in the definition of a related party, an associate includes subsidiaries of the associate and the joint venture includes subsidiaries of the joint venture. Example, R Limited has an associate B Limited, B Limited has a subsidiary S Limited, a joint venture, J Limited and an associate A Limited. R Limited is the reporting entity. It identifies B Limited and S Limited as its related party. J Limited and A Limited are not related parties of R Limited here. Next, the aforesaid definition is wide and exhaustive. The standard, therefore, as has been stated above, lays emphasis on the substance of the relationship rather than legal form. Understanding who are not related parties. The standard clarifies that certain relationships are not related party relationships. These are as follows. Two entities are not related parties simply because they have a director or other member of KMP in common, or because a member of KMP of one entity has significant influence over other entity. Example, Mr. A is the director in X Limited. He is also director in Y Limited. He has no other interest in either of these companies. There are no transactions between these two entities. In such a case, X Limited and Y Limited are not related parties. Mr. A is a director in X Limited. He is also a director in Y Limited. He has no other interest in either of these companies. Y Limited purchased the entire production of X Limited. The transactions are always at arm's length. X Limited and Y Limited may be related parties as it is Quite possible that Y Limited may be able to exercise control or significant control over X Limited. As per this standard, substance is more important than mere legal form. Two venturers, two venturers are not related parties simply because they share joint control over a joint venture. Example, JV Limited is an equal joint venture of J Limited and V Limited. Here, J Limited and V Limited are not related parties. Next, providers of finance, trade unions, public utilities, and departments and agencies of a government that does not control, jointly control, or significantly influence the reporting entity are not related parties simply by virtue of their normal dealings with an entity, even though they may affect the freedom of action of an entity or participate in its decision making process. Example, a bank, Bank A and Bank B, has provided finance to XY Limited. By virtue of a loan agreement, they occupy a non executive observer seat on the board of directors of XY Limited. Here, Bank A and Bank B are not related parties of XY Limited. Next, a customer, supplier, franchisor, distributor, or general agent with whom an entity transacts a significant volume of business simply by virtue of the resulting economic dependence. Example, A Limited is an auto ancillary of an automobile company. It supplies all its production to the automobile company. Automobile company has no other interest in A Limited. Here, A Limited and automobile company are not related parties. Next, understanding related party transactions. A related party transaction is a transfer of resources, services, or obligations between a reporting entity and a related party, regardless of whether a price is charged. It is not necessary for any consideration to be passed for related party transactions. That means consideration is irrelevant in case of related party transactions. Disclosures. Category 1, first disclosure, disclosure of relationships. Even though there are no related party transactions between the disclosure related parties. Category 2, disclosures of relationships and items only when there are related party transactions. Another category 1, disclosures, relationship between parents and subsidiaries. Under this, an entity is required to disclose the name of its parent and, if different, the ultimate controlling party. It may be noted that ultimate controlling party may be a person also. For example, S4 Limited, a reporting entity, is a subsidiary of S3 Limited. S3 Limited is a subsidiary of S2 Limited. S2 Limited is a subsidiary of S1 Limited. S1 Limited is a subsidiary of H Limited. Here, S4 Limited, S3 Limited, S2 Limited, and S1 Limited must disclose the name and relationship with S3 Limited, S2 Limited, and S1 Limited respectively, and with H Limited. If neither the entity's parent nor the ultimate controlling party produces consolidated financial statements available for public use, the name of the next most senior parent that does so should also be disclosed. Example, S4 Limited, a reporting entity, is a subsidiary of S3 Limited. S3 Limited is a subsidiary of S2 Limited. S2 Limited is a subsidiary of S1 Limited. S1 Limited is a subsidiary of H Limited. Only S2 Limited and S1 Limited produces consolidated financial statements, CFS, for public use. S4 Limited must disclose the name and relationship with S3 Limited, S2 Limited, and H Limited. But if S3 Limited, S2 Limited, S1 Limited, and H Limited all produces consolidated financial statements, that is CFS for public use, S4 Limited must disclose the name and relationship with S3 Limited and H Limited. Category 2, disclosures. Under this category, two types of disclosures are required. The first requires disclosures relating to compensation to KMP, key managerial persons. The second requires other disclosures where there have been related party transactions during the year. Disclosures of compensation to key managerial persons. Total compensation to KMPs must be disclosed. If the entity obtains KMP services from another entity, the management entity, the entity is not required to disclose the compensation paid by the management entity to the management entity's employees or directors. Discloses where there have been related party transactions during the year. It shall disclose In addition to the disclosures listed above, the following: the nature of the related party relationship, the information about this related party transactions and outstanding balances, including commitments. Their disclosures at a minimum shall include amount of transactions, amount of outstanding balances, including commitments, and their terms and conditions, including whether they are secured and the nature of the consideration to be provided in settlement, and details of any guarantees given or received. Provision for doubtful debts related to the amount of outstanding balances should also be disclosed, and the expenses recognized during the period in respect of bad or doubtful debts due from related party need to be disclosed. However, discloses that related party transactions were made in arm's length transactions should be made only if such terms can be verified. Next, exemption available to government related entities. A reporting entity is exempt from disclosure requirements in relation to related party transactions, outstanding balances, and commitments with a government that has control, joint control, or significant influence over a reporting entity and another entity that is a related party because the same government has control, joint control, or significant influence over both the reporting entity and the other entity. However, it shall disclose name of the government, nature of the government's relationship with the entity to enable the users to understand the effect of related party transactions. The following information in sufficient details should be disclosed: the nature and the amount of each significant transaction, individual significant transaction. For other transactions that are not significant individually but are significant when aggregated, either a qualitative or quantitative indication of their extent should be disclosed. Thus, the reporting entity is expected to apply its judgment to determine the level of details it is required to disclose as per above.